Well, many thanks, Lada, for that. Well, I'd like also to underline one of the statements that you made in your presentation, that you as a regulator are open for discussion. I think this is clearly something which is very important to all the stakeholders, the researchers and the innovators in particular, and that you also underlined the needs to keep an eye on the new developments, as did also the other panel members. And one of the things that you also underlined is that in the new developments, it's not so easy always to judge where you have the pharmaceutical product or a medical device under your review. Now, I'd like to thank all the panel members for their presentations, and many thanks also for being really on time, which now leaves ample time also for the exchanges and the discussions of the panel. And I'd also like to open now the floor to the audience, so you can put your questions and comments to the speakers. But before opening the floor and also the questions, some of the questions still that I asked at the beginning, you didn't reply in your presentations, because I understand that you prepared them beforehand. One of the things which I'd also like to add, because one of the speakers could not stay here for this panel discussion, and as she's Dr. Swai from South Africa, clearly her perspective, as she underlined, as the perspective coming from a developing country, I think is important also for the international cooperation perspective. And what she underlined were three issues. First, what she feels the regulators from her country, but likewise supposedly from Africa and perhaps also from other developing countries, where the regulatory authorities are not as developed as in the countries who are represented at the panel. She underlined the need for training programs particularly for regulators, well, also for innovators, but particularly for regulators. Then also particularly guidance on the approaches and guidance concerning generics. This could be relevant for many countries for whose economy the generics sector is important. And then also the characterization technologies, which are crucial. So this is also something I'd like to leave for the panel. Perhaps if you can also provide some comments on the issues that she has highlighted. But now, before opening for the to you, the audience, I'd first like to just to do a little test and put two questions to you as the audience. So the first question is, and please raise your hands, how many of you are currently part of a nanomedicine project or network? Well, so the majority. And then the second question is, how many of you have approached a regulator or regulators with your new project or innovation at hand? Well, quite a few. Not that bad. Well, I'd say that at least half of those who said yes to or nearly half, perhaps 40% would be more accurate, of those who replied positively to the first question. There is a particular reason for this question, as if you followed attentively what the panel members said, then quite a few of them underlined the importance of a few researchers, innovators, of getting in contact with the regulators at an early stage, in order really then to ensure authorizations, but also that they have all the elements that they need for the risk assessment and all other procedures that they have. But now, please, if you have any questions to the panel members, so please go ahead. Please use the microphones and please introduce yourselves when you put the question. Yes.
Patrick Hunziker. Yeah. We highly appreciate your work, your collaboration, your being here, because I believe this exchange is most valuable for moving forward. I have two questions. One question is the question that the new medicines, the targeted medicines, have very large price tags sometimes, which risks to threaten the economy of our hospitals and healthcare systems. Now, is this because the world has become so difficult? Is this because pharmaceutical companies make so much profit? Or is this because the regulatory hurdles are so high that it has become impossible to develop economic drugs? The second question relates to personalized medicine. There are rumors that in the United States there is a strong lobby that tries to keep out machine learning, artificial intelligence, expert system like IBM Watson out of the reach of FDA. And I'm just interested to hear about your view about this question, how far that expert systems and machine learning, which become more and more important for our task, are actually drugs and should be regulated or kind of should be left out of the field.
Okay, many thanks for these questions. Perhaps as the second question was very clearly targeted to the US, perhaps then the panel members of FDA can try to reply to that. And meanwhile, I guess that all the panel members actually can provide their perspective concerning the first question. So it's Catherine or Frank? Catherine.
So I'll respond to the second question first about potential pressures for keeping out emerging technologies, AI, machine learning. If there are political pressures that haven't gotten down to my level, which I guess is good. So we do actually have mechanisms in place to help us, first of all, learn about those techniques, such as artificial intelligence, neural networks, blockchain, all of that. And then we also have an external facing group, which is the Emerging Technology Program, which people outside are welcome to schedule meetings for and discuss these new innovations and how they can be applied to drug products, even if there's not an application in place. And then I'm going to turn the price question over to Frank.
Catherine, not to be critical, but one of the aspects to consider with IBM Watson and the existing knowledge, as it is applied to non-medical and non-natural science knowledge, I think it's easier to leverage AI. But if you just think of the amount of information that is in chemistry, in recombinant chemistry, and just the names and compounds that you would have to deal with and load actually artificial intelligence and give access, not to talk about the dog genome where we do not know what things are encoded, it makes probably clear that we don't have enough knowledge actually in the system to address meaningful algorithms and develop algorithms to make computer-based answers. But also, in addition, the algorithms that are developed in some cases for specific uses, and I think imaging is one of the examples where we do use AI in decision-making processes, and we just approved the product that does it for imaging. We take that route, and we have very strong collaborations with Watson, IBM, and also certainly with the blockchain. So just watch that development, and you might be surprised. To the price. Of course, it's a complex issue, and we all can debate why this so is. We have a health system that is for profit and that generates certain rules and laws. But we also are not very efficient in using the data that we should have. And there are several reasons for it. Historically, of course, we have separated the standard of care from human experimentation just because we didn't have electronic systems to connect the paperwork, and we created a separate paperwork process. Reconciling this information is very expensive and is very, it's error-prone. And for those of you who had the opportunity to listen to the clinical innovation inspiration that I tried to give in one of the talks, and also the challenges that we have with clinical laboratory data, which is actually the most objective resource of information, not just for the standard of care, but also in clinical development, there is a lot of room for improvement. And there are some estimates that we are currently, let me say, wasting a third of the money for things that are absolutely not necessary. And unfortunately, we cannot yet leverage the combined knowledge of the existing knowledge in medicine and link it into the decision-making process. But there's also a question of commerce, and that I would defer because it's a philosophical question.
Well, thanks. In order to enable also, the other panel speakers to speak and to enable time for more questions, then I'd also like to ask the panel speakers, when they reply, to confine themselves in not more than 1 minute. The European perspective now, Marisa, please.
Just would like to give good news. We have established, in conjunction with the heads of medicines agency in the member states, a task force, an HMA-MA task force on big data and cross-cutting group on advanced analytics. So we are really putting down the foundation, and just keep an eye on our website, because the action plan with detailed action and deliverables will be published by the end of the year. So from there, this one. The other one we may establish very soon as we move to Netherlands, a lab on artificial intelligence. First of all, to streamline our work and liberate some of the resources we have for augmented human intelligence.
On the price, you would.
On the price, we are really working with the UNETA, with the joint undertaking, in order to align all we know, all we see, the things they need. So we try to endeavor that during the development of all these activities, they can already follow and see what will be the impact and work with us to make it in a stepwise approach.
Thanks. Any other panel members? Canadian perspectives? What is this?
Sure, I'll answer the AI or big data. We are aware of it, and we have internal discussions and working groups regarding it, so it is on our radar. And in terms of the cost, if you notice on our regulatory review, 2 of the projects were to increase the availability of biosimilars and generics. And that was an initiative from the government that was elected in 2015. So there is an awareness of the cost, and looking at ways of reducing it. As far as why it's expensive, I'm not going to. I'll defer answering that.
Okay. If there are no other replies from the panel, then we have more questions. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm former regulator in the nuclear industry in a very long past life, but currently working on public engagement and nanotechnology. And I was interested in the Canadian representatives about helping the public be more aware of what you do. How would you know what you had achieved?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer to that. There are a number of facets to that project. There's been discussions of releasing clinical data once a decision's been made, so either a negative or positive decision on a product. I don't know if it would be in terms of educating the public or simply just informing them, or simply saying, the information is here, because there have been some criticisms that, decisions are made in a bit of a black box for the general public, and if we can, you know, show some decision-making process or shine light on that process, I would say that would most likely be a success.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Yes.
Beat. Okay. We have started this session one day that Marisa said, why don't we create trust between those who do novel methods, novel approaches, and it's great. It has worked. In 5 years now, people know a face, they know a person, and indeed this lowers the levels. And I ask myself sometimes, all those big guys who are all the time bringing products to you, what can we learn from them? Do they know your face, or do they just have a procedure that works systematic? Could we learn something out of that? Would we have an advantage knowing the face and knowing the practice of others who are routinely approaching you?
Well, thanks a lot. That's the, well, face-to-face. Yeah, yes, please.
Well, of course, the innovators, be academic or industrial innovators, they know the face of the person in charge of their file. But this is only one side of the story for the trust, because the other story is fairness, not just transparency and communication. Fairness. And fairness is very much based on very consistently applied processes and standard procedures and equal treatment to anyone, independent of the face.
I meant like companies like Roche and Novartis who daily have to approach you for their average products, lower level products.
Well, they have faces because there is a responsibility identified within the agency of the contact person for that, as well as there's a responsibility identified in the member states, who is the lead scientist who will take care of it, his name and, you know, is clearly identifiable. And this is clearly to enhance the ability to communicate with the innovators. But on the other side, we have to be sure that independent from that, there is a fair treatment, equal treatment to everyone.
Well, I agree it's an important point. Yes, please.
I think an important point of the big companies is that they have a professionalized system in place to make the applications. So the people that do these applications do them over and over and over and over again. So they know how to do them. And I'm not sure how the best way would be for the startups or the spin-offs. Maybe the universities could have something similar in place to help them, or there should really be a process to help the other players that are not used to do these applications every day to do them as efficiently. So it's a very, very good point.
If I
Yes, please.
may add to that, the transparency, of course, is a critical question. And for that, we have a public process, as you know, because the agency is representing the public. What is also commonly known is that we currently interpret submissions from, let's say, when you say the big pharma is submitting, of course, it goes into a process that is product-specific, where there is expertise in the review divisions that deal with particular diseases and also particular technology. There are communication and working groups across the agency who benefit from that exchange of information, and there are a number of that, and you actually can find some of that also on our websites. However, if something is in review, that's commonly not public information. If the product got approved, then it becomes public information, and at least you can see the summary basis of approval. And as you also know through the communications of our very active commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, we are pushing systems to give the public access to the details, to the data actually on which basis the submission was approved. This is part of the FDA Transparency Initiative that has been developed over the past 6-7 years. Yet we do have still room for improvement, particularly in technological platforms, because not all data that is accessible can be actually incorporated into data analysis. It basically has to be reformatted and screen scraped to be used for analysis, and that's a disadvantage. So we are working toward the utility of the data that we have as public information from the submissions. We are working on some of the hurdles that prevent us to share data that is in submission, and one of the advantages that we try to leverage here is that we get actually patient data level information, which the European colleagues don't, and we hope that we convert this into a true value to the commons globally.
Well, actually, legislation allows us to have individual patient data already today, but the point is, until you have the methodology to make this available, we use it only for the review process. We don't redo the analysis. This is a long discussion among the two agencies, but we are looking forward to be able to pseudo-anonymize data and make data available as soon as the opinions is adopted and authorization given.
Okay, are there any? Yes, there is one more question, please.
This perhaps is a more focused question than the ones we've had up to now, but it's one that's I've been interested in as I've heard more and more of these talks, and that is, at one point you have drugs that are being entered as ANDAs, even though they're pretty complex formulations with pretty interesting substructures. And at the other end, you have medical device drug combinations. And I'm wondering, do you foresee a time when you have difficulty in deciding whether you've got a routine drug or a drug-device combination when you have to bring CDRH or the equivalent notified body into the picture? Is that going to be a problem at that interface, or do you think it's going to be pretty clear what goes into one bucket and what goes into the other?
Well, it's a crucial question which has clearly emerged in the discussion, but perhaps, yeah, can you give the perspectives?
So I can answer quickly, yes. I mean, as the products get more complex, there's an increasing blurring of the lines, and I think that's something that we've discussed quite a bit. In terms of the US FDA, there's actually an office, it's called the Office of Combination Products, whose sole responsibility is to make that designation. And similar to what we do in CEDAR, they're doing constant horizon scanning research to help be able to address those complex questions as they come in.
In Europe, as you know, we have a separate framework, but I think it's very clear. It depends on the mechanism of action and what is the driving force into the therapeutics, into the product. If the driving force is in the device, then the ancillary product is evaluated by us, but is authorized according to the device legislation. And the reverse happens for the case where the medicinal substance is the driving force for the therapy. Now, there are borderline constructs which are not medical device, but are not either, neither medicinal products. In Europe, at the moment, the legislation is that member states will decide. So if a member state decides that it's a device, it's a device. But thanks to the new regulation, the competences needed for a complex device which is borderline with a medicine, the new legislation foresees really very good cooperation between the two frameworks. So we have not yet tasted the pudding, but we are preparing for it.
Neil Desai.
Well, sorry, first at the back and then Bert.
Jon de Vlieger, coordinator of the Non-Biological Complex Drugs Working Group. I really appreciate the opinions and the views of the regulators individually in this session. And I also listen to your voices saying, reach out to us as soon as possible. I'd like to turn this around, also referring to the comment by the Director General, is to ask the regulators to reach out to each other as soon as possible if you start thinking about creating guidance on complex issues. Because that will be quite efficient, will be, let's say, sparing some time of your experts, and perhaps stimulate quick availability of these products for our patients. I know you're involved in some of these initiatives, but I would be eager to hear a bit more on this. Maybe you can comment to that.
Well, this was actually the question that I wanted to to conclude the session, just to ask the regulators' point of view. What do they see as the most, I asked earlier, the most promising areas for cooperation, but also the most necessary areas for cooperation in order to really enable then the similar approaches across the globe. And we've heard a few key words, clearly guidelines, guidance, quite a few speakers mentioned those. Then also classification, characterization. Well, in my opening speech yesterday, I mentioned the EU-US cooperation on the characterization lab. Then standards, this came out very clearly from quite a few presentations. So in conclusion, I'd like all the panelists just to we don't have a lot of time, just 30 seconds each, then to give your reply to that. And if there is anything you feel that you'd like to express, but you haven't had the time. But if Beat has a very important no, then we can just then do the concluding round before concluding. Yeah.
Very quickly, there are two levels we have to consider for innovative emerging technologies and science. The first one is the awareness and the understanding of the issues around it. And this takes place in meetings like this one and other ones, or even in ITF, Innovation Task Force, European Innovation Network, kind of informal discussion. But the most important tools we have to ensure that we do not diverge, but we converge, particularly for innovative products, is that we have clusters of confidentiality agreements with Japan, with the United States FDA and other authorities. And in that context, we discuss specific emerging challenges for a specific product. And on this basis, then, we can decide together at which point in time a guideline can be issued, because guideline can be a disastrous tool. But these clusters, which are therapeutic area, therapeutic indication specific, and enriched with other competencies are needed, technological, toxicological, whatever, those are really the big instrument we've been put in place in the last 10 years, and more to come. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, I'm a research scientist, and so I cannot have answer. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay, no problem.
I'll give a very broad and general answer. I think, you know, if you look at our regulatory review projects, we see, you know, work sharing between smaller agencies, use of foreign reviews. A lot of with the work sharing, you know, you need to share that. You need to have those agreements in place that we can actually cooperate with each other. So I think building those bridges between regulatory agencies and not just the large ones are probably some of the critical issues we need to address.
Regulation isn't fixed. It's a learning system too, just as science evolves, and that's something to be kept in mind. And to Jan's point about harmonization, we try to do this, and Katrin is going to address that in a little bit more detail, but also see that we have created just a couple of years ago a new pathway in a way by establishing the Oncology Center of Excellence, where the divide between technologies and approaches between devices and drugs and biologics actually doesn't matter. We focus on disease areas, and of course you also can philosophically stipulate diseases or fractals of different subsets of diseases, and eventually all of that will change too. But let me come to some of the opportunities where we need to harmonize and discuss across the globe, and where we all need to be engaged. And I mentioned that before. We do not know where the source data comes from, at least in the US system. We do not have unique patient identifiers to validate where the information on which basis we develop evidence on is actually located and where the original, let's say, information was supplied to and how it was measured. And that's something we need to fix. Secondly, I also mentioned that before, the laboratory data traceability is a very critical issue because we do not know what we have. And we also need to think globally about data ownership. Patients need to own the data. Patients are citizens. Citizens need to have rights to the data and need to be able to influence what can be done with it and if they provide it to the commons. And I think clinical trial innovation is a great opportunity to close the circle to the costs, to reduce costs and merge the standard of care with human experimentation in a meaningful way where the technological platforms we actually do have. It's more a cultural question to evolve that and work in consortial efforts to approach a merging between the two enterprises, if you want to look at it in such a way. Thank you.
So in terms of low-hanging fruit for where the regulators can start, can cooperate more, or we can get some quick wins and easy action items, one would be the standards. So we've been working harder, and I know this has been brought up with other people, that we've been working to work with the consensus standards and work within that framework. Anil Patri has been one of the instruments of trying to get a lot more activity there for the development of these products. I know we have some meetings coming up for that, and I'd recommend that if you're interested in participating, to talk to Anil.
Yeah, I think the interaction and cooperation among the regulatory agencies in the different countries are extremely important, particularly where the nano-enabled emerging medicines or devices, medicine combinations are coming up, because there we need to really even the exchange our ideas and share some thought which can help these kind of disruptive innovation can come into the patient's application.
And I'm going to go with my colleague of Canada. I think for smaller agencies, the joint reviews are also very important to get harmonized, and so that's a very important collaboration as well.
Well, many thanks for all your comments, because the time is up. So I'm just concluding in 3 sentences. Well, the first is that what we've learned that regulators really talk to each other. They talk to each other and discuss relevant subjects for the future. And now you've heard more about that. They encourage you, that is all the innovators and researchers, to come to you at an early stage, share with you the information that you have. And finally, what we should aim at, and I'd like to use Marissa's last slide when she showed us the slide concerning innovation in the global regulatory science ecosystem, which I think is key because innovation is global. And we should also make sure that the regulatory ecosystems in different countries take that perspective into account. And now, please give a big applause to all the speakers at the panel.